I didn't notice the change all at once. That's the part that still makes my stomach flip when I think back on it, because I live with my husband, I fold his shirts, I bump into him in the hallway half asleep, I rest my head on his shoulder during movies, and yet the first sign of what was coming arrived so quietly it could have been mistaken for nothing at all. A new carefulness in the way he moved, like he'd started sharing space with something delicate he didn't want to bruise. It was a Tuesday, the kind that tastes like reheated coffee and fluorescent lights. I came home with my shoes in my hand because my heels had finally declared war on my feet, and I called out his name the way I always did, expecting the usual answer from the kitchen or the living room. Instead, I heard a drawer slide shut in our bedroom, then another, and then his voice. Too quick, too bright. "Hey,
You're home early."
He appeared in the doorway with that familiar smile, but there was a split-second delay, a tiny glitch, as if he'd had to remember how to arrange his face. I chalked it up to stress. He'd been carrying a lot lately. New responsibilities at work, his father's declining health, that constant pressure he put on himself to be steady for everyone. He took my bag from my shoulder and kissed my cheek. Normal. Routine. But when he leaned in, he angled his body in a way that kept his chest slightly away from me, and when I hugged him back, my hands met a resistance that wasn't there before. Not hardness, not muscle, just shape. Softness that didn't belong to the man I'd married, or at least not to the version of him I thought I knew. I let go quickly, pretending I hadn't noticed. He stepped back and reached for my hand like he was guiding me away from an edge. "Dinner," he offered. "I can order. Or we can cook." His eyes flicked toward the bedroom again, and I followed the movement before I could stop myself. The door wasn't fully closed. A sliver of darkness, a private wedge of space. We never kept doors half shut in our house. We were either open or we were asleep. "What's in there?" I asked, trying to sound playful. "Nothing," he said instantly, then laughed like he'd made a joke. "Just laundry." I was trying to be helpful. He wasn't lying exactly, not with the words. But his body told a different story. His shoulders were tense, his hands too still, his breathing shallow. I watched him and felt something shift in me, a prickle at the base of my neck, the same instinct you get when you realize a room has gone quiet because someone stopped talking the moment you walked in. I could have pushed. I didn't. That's another detail that haunts me. All the moments I could have asked the right question and chose the easier one instead, because the easier one let me keep my life the way it was. So I smiled and said, "You? Doing laundry? I should mark the calendar." And he relaxed just enough to breathe again, just enough to pretend with me. We ordered dinner and ate on the couch. He laughed at the same parts of the show we were watching, but he didn't lean back the way he usually did. He sat forward, as if the cushions were too soft, as if he needed to keep control of where his body went. When I shifted closer, he didn't move away, but I felt him brace. And when I rested my head on his shoulder, I felt that new carefulness again, the way he held himself like he was protecting something under the fabric. That night, after he fell asleep, I lay staring at the ceiling, listening to the rhythm of his breathing, and my mind began to do what minds do when they've been handed a thread. It started to pull. There had been other signs, scattered and easy to ignore. A package delivered while I was at work that he'd rushed to bring inside. A new brand of laundry detergent, unscented and expensive, as if he'd suddenly become sensitive to fragrance. The way he'd started taking longer showers, claiming he needed time to think. The sudden interest in posture. He'd watched a video about standing tall, and then spent days rolling his shoulders back, like he was trying on a different way of existing. The quiet new habit of locking his phone, something he'd never done in our entire marriage. I told myself it was grief, or stress, or maybe he was planning a surprise. That thought made my heart lighten for a moment. Maybe an anniversary trip, maybe a new job, maybe a puppy he'd finally agreed to. But there was a heaviness under all my guesses, something I didn't want to name, because naming it would make it real. And if it was real, it meant I had been living beside a secret, and the idea of that made me feel like the floor could shift under my feet at any moment. The next morning, he stood in the bathroom brushing his teeth while I put on mascara. The mirror held us together, our faces side by side. He met my eyes in the reflection, then looked away so fast it was almost a flinch. When he rinsed his mouth, he pulled his t-shirt away from his chest before leaning over the sink, like the fabric was suddenly a risk. I watched him and said nothing. I hate that I said nothing, but the truth is I was scared. Not of him, of what the conversation might do to us, of opening a door and finding out I couldn't close it again. Later that week, the first real hook sank into me. I came home to find a small padded envelope in the mailbox addressed to him. Not unusual. But the return label was from a boutique I didn't recognize, and the logo was a delicate script, the kind you see on perfume boxes and wedding invitations. The package was light as air. I held it in my hand for a full minute before bringing it inside. I didn't open it. I didn't even shake it. I just stared at it like it might speak. He was in the kitchen when I walked in, humming under his breath. He turned when he saw me holding the envelope, and the color drained from his face so quickly it was almost frightening. "Oh," he said. One syllable, flat. "That came." "It's for you," I said, keeping my voice even. "Do you want it?" He stepped forward too fast, hands out like he was catching something falling.
"Yeah."
"Thanks." He took it, and his fingers trembled. That, more than anything, made my throat tighten. Trembling was not his usual language. He was a man who fixed leaking faucets, who carried heavy grocery bags in one trip just to prove he could, who stood calm in emergencies. Whatever this envelope was, it had reached a part of him I'd never seen. He tucked it under his arm and tried to smile. "Just something for work." "For work," I repeated, and I heard how strange it sounded. I watched him walk down the hall toward the bedroom and close the door firmly behind him. I stayed in the kitchen and listened. Silence. Then the faint sound of paper tearing, careful and slow, like he didn't want to damage what was inside. I imagined a letter, a document, a certificate, something official. Then I heard something else, softer, a quick inhale, like he'd been holding his breath and finally let it go. Relief. Or fear. I set my keys down and stared at the counter until my eyes blurred. The suspense wasn't dramatic like in movies, with music and shadows. It was domestic. It was the hum of the fridge and the faint ticking of the clock, the ordinary sounds of a life that suddenly felt staged. When he came back out, his hands were empty. "Everything okay?" he asked, as if he hadn't just looked like he'd seen a ghost.
"Fine," I said.
"You?" He nodded too many times.
"Yeah."
"Just tired." That night, I waited until he was asleep again. My heart pounded like I was doing something unforgivable, and maybe I was. But the not knowing had become its own kind of betrayal, a silent wall between us. I slipped out of bed and padded down the hall, my bare feet silent on the carpet. The bedroom door was closed. I put my hand on the knob and hesitated. This was the line. I could step over it, or I could go back to bed and pretend. My hand shook. I hated myself for that, too. I opened the door. The room was dark, lit only by the weak glow of the streetlight through the blinds. Everything looked normal. The dresser, the laundry basket, the chair with a jacket draped over it. Then my eyes adjusted, and I saw it. The closet door was slightly open. We shared that closet, but we had an unspoken geography. My dresses and blouses on the left, his shirts and suits on the right. My shoes in neat pairs, his in a slightly messy line. We'd merged our lives without ever fully mixing them, and that had always felt comfortable, like a respectful border. I moved toward the closet and slid the door open. At first, nothing stood out. Then I noticed the new hanger. Not one of ours. A white satin hanger with a little bow on it, the kind you get when you buy something meant to feel special. Hanging from it was a garment bag, opaque and zipped. It was placed behind his suits, tucked away like a shy person in a crowd. I didn't unzip it right away. I stood there with my hand hovering, my pulse loud in my ears. Then, because I was already here and already crossing lines, I pulled the zipper down. Inside was a bra. Not lingerie, in the way people might imagine when they hear that word. It wasn't lace or ribbons or anything that felt like a performance for someone else. It was a simple, smooth-cupped bra, nude-colored, practical, almost medical in its plainness. The cups were full, shaped. The straps were wide. It looked like something designed to hold weight gently and securely. My mouth went dry. I reached out and touched the fabric.
Soft. Real.
Then I saw the box on the shelf above, tucked behind a shoebox. A plain cardboard box with no label. I pulled it down, hands clumsy, and opened it. Inside were silicone breast forms. They were heavier than I expected. Warm from the closet air. Realistic enough that my brain had a moment of confusion, like it couldn't decide what it was seeing. They weren't a joke. They weren't Halloween props. They were made with care, designed to mimic the way a body naturally curves. I sat down on the floor of the closet like my legs had decided to stop working. My thoughts raced. Why? How long? What does this mean? What else don't I know? Then my eyes caught something else. A folded piece of paper wedged under the box. A receipt. I unfolded it and read the item descriptions, the sizes. The total.
The date.
He had bought them weeks ago.
Weeks.
He had been living with this secret while making coffee, while asking me about my day, while kissing me goodnight. And I had been smiling back, not knowing I was touching the surface of something deep and hidden. My first feeling wasn't anger. It was grief. Not because he had breast forms, but because he had felt he needed to hide them. Because whatever this was, it had been lonely. I put everything back exactly as I found it. I zipped the garment bag. I returned the box to the shelf. I slid the closet door closed until it looked untouched. Then I crept back to bed and lay there staring into the darkness, my husband's breathing beside me steady and unaware. By morning, my fear had transformed into something sharper. Determination. I couldn't live in a house where secrets sat on shelves between our clothes. I couldn't be married to a mystery. At breakfast, he moved around the kitchen with forced normalcy, making toast, asking about my schedule. I watched his hands. I watched his throat as he swallowed. I watched how he kept his shoulders slightly hunched, as if hiding his chest even now. I set my mug down and said, very quietly, I went into the closet last night. The butter knife paused midair. His whole body went still. For a second, I thought he might pretend he didn't understand. But then his face changed, and the mask slipped. His eyes widened, and something like shame flooded his expression so fast it made my chest ache. He started, then stopped. His voice was rough.
Why?
Because something fell off, I said. And I was scared. His mouth opened and closed like he couldn't find the right words. Then he looked down at his hands, at the knife, at the toast, as if focusing on objects could keep him from falling apart. I didn't want you to find it like that, he whispered. Find what? I said, even though my heart already knew, because I wanted him to say it. I needed him to name it in the air between us, to make it something we could both see. He swallowed. His eyes flicked up to mine, then away. The forms.
The bra.
The kitchen felt too bright. Outside, a car passed, ordinary life continuing like nothing was happening. Inside, everything was changing. Tell me, I said. My voice shook. Tell me what's going on. He pressed his fingers to his forehead and let out a breath that sounded like he'd been holding it for years. I don't know how to explain it without sounding ridiculous. Try, I said. Please. He sat down heavily at the table, as if his legs couldn't hold him. It started as curiosity. Not like a joke. Not like, I don't know. He rubbed his palms together, anxious. I was trying to understand something about myself that I've pushed down for a long time. Ever since I was a kid, I've had this pull toward femininity, toward what it feels like to be soft, to be seen differently. I didn't have words for it. I just knew I was supposed to be one thing, so I tried harder to be that. I watched him as he spoke, the way each word seemed to cost him. And then lately, he continued, with everything happening, Dad, work, the pressure, I started thinking about how short life is, and how I've spent so much of it pretending, not lying to you, not on purpose, just living in a way that fit everyone else's expectations. My throat tightened. So you bought them? I said softly. He nodded, eyes still down. I told myself it was just to see.
To feel what it would be like.
To breathe, I guess. Did you wear them? I asked, and my voice came out quieter than I expected. He flinched, then nodded again, a small, almost invisible movement. A few times, when you were out, I'd put them on under his shirt and look in the mirror. His voice cracked on the word mirror. And for a moment, it felt like my body made sense in a way it never has. Like I wasn't fighting myself. A silence settled between us. It wasn't empty. It was full of everything we weren't saying. Fear, love, uncertainty, the fragile shape of our marriage. My mind flashed through images. Him alone in our bedroom, carefully placing those forms against his chest, adjusting a bra strap, staring at himself with a mixture of wonder and dread. I imagined him hearing my car in the driveway and rushing to hide everything, heart pounding, terrified of being caught. The thought made my eyes sting. "Why didn't you tell me?" I asked, and I hated how small my voice sounded. He finally looked up, and his eyes were wet. "Because I was terrified you'd look at me and see a stranger. Or worse, see something disgusting." He swallowed hard. Because the title in my head was always the cruel one. The one that said, "Surprise, your husband isn't what you thought." I reached across the table before I could think and put my hand over his. His skin was warm, familiar. The same hand that had held mine at our wedding, that had carried boxes when we moved into this house, that had squeezed my fingers when I cried at my mother's funeral. "I don't see you as disgusting," I said. "I see you as scared." A sob slipped out of him, quick and embarrassed. He turned his face away, but I held his hand tighter. "I'm sorry I looked," I said. "I should have asked. But I need you to understand. I'm not angry at what you're feeling. I'm shaken by the secrecy." He nodded, wiping his eyes with the back of his hand like he was angry at them. "I know." The next twist came not in the form of an argument, but in the form of something he pulled from his pocket later that day. We'd both gone to work, because life doesn't pause for personal earthquakes. But the air between us felt charged all day, like a storm held back by thin walls. When I got home, he was already there, sitting on the edge of the couch, hands clasped, waiting like someone about to give a confession. "I need to show you something," he said. My stomach dropped. "Okay." He reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone, then hesitated. "I'm giving you permission," he said quietly.
To see.
He unlocked it and handed it to me. On the screen was a folder of photos. My breath caught. The first image was him in our bedroom, standing in front of the mirror. He wore a plain t-shirt, but his silhouette was different. Fuller, rounded, undeniably feminine in the chest. The bra straps were hidden under the fabric. His shoulders were still his jaw still his, but the overall shape was new. Not ridiculous. Not comedic. Just real in a startling way. In the next photo, he'd added a cardigan, the kind I wore on cold days. It hung differently on him, draping over curves. In another, he'd tried a simple necklace, one of mine, and his hand hovered near his collarbone as if he didn't know where to rest it. And then I saw the expression on his face. Not a smirk, not a joke, not a performance. It was an expression I had never seen on him in all our years together. Softness mixed with longing, like someone recognizing themselves for the first time and being afraid it might vanish if they blinked. I scrolled slowly, my hands trembling. A photo where he'd tried a little concealer under his eyes, the faintest touch of color on his lips. Another where he'd practiced smiling differently, less forced, more open. Each photo felt like reading pages from a diary he'd written with his own face. When I reached the end, I realized I was holding my breath. I looked up at him. He was watching me like his life depended on my reaction. "I didn't take these because I wanted to deceive you," he said quickly, voice strained. "I took them because I couldn't believe it. I needed proof it was real. And because part of me wanted someone to see, even if it was only me." I swallowed. My voice was unsteady when I spoke. "You look relieved in these." He closed his eyes briefly, as if the word hit him hard. "Yes." A strange thing happened then, an emotional twist I didn't expect. My fear shifted again, not into acceptance exactly, but into recognition. Because I knew what it was to wear a mask. I knew what it was to perform a version of yourself that made everyone else comfortable. I had my own quiet costume. The dependable wife, the organized one, the person who never needed too much. I had spent years being the one who held things together, and I had never asked myself what it would feel like to let go. You called it curiosity, I said. But it feels bigger than curiosity. He stared at the floor. I don't know what it is yet, he admitted. I don't know what I'm allowed to be. I just know that when I put them on, I stop feeling like I'm at war with myself. I set the phone down. My hands were cold. Do you want to keep doing it? I asked. He hesitated. Yes, he whispered. But I don't want to lose you. My eyes burned. You're not losing me tonight, I said. But we need to talk. We need to be honest. No more hiding in closets. He nodded, and the relief on his face was so intense it was almost painful to witness. Like he'd been bracing for disaster and was shocked to find a hand reaching for him instead. That evening, we sat at the kitchen table again, the same place where we'd eaten toast that morning, as if the table had become the only stable ground. He told me stories he'd never told anyone, how as a teenager he'd been drawn to the women's section of stores and then hated himself for it, how he'd once tried on a sister's sweater when no one was home and felt both joy and terror, how he'd learned to bury every soft desire under layers of be a man until he barely knew what he wanted anymore. I listened, and my chest ached with a kind of love I didn't have words for. Not the easy love of shared routines, but the harder love of witnessing someone's truth. Then he said something that made my stomach drop again. I've been thinking about making it more permanent. I stared. Permanent how? He swallowed.
Hormones.
Maybe. I don't know. I haven't done anything. When I imagine having a chest that's mine, not something I put on and take off, it feels peaceful. And that scares me. The title I'd joked about in my head, My Husband's New Chest Surprise, suddenly felt less like a quirky secret and more like a doorway to a different life. I took a long breath. Are you saying you want to transition? I asked carefully. His eyes filled again. I don't know, he said. I don't know if I'm a man who crossdresses, or if I'm something else. I'm not trying to rush, but I can't pretend I didn't think it. I reached for his hand. Okay, I said, even though my heart was beating too fast. Okay, then we figure it out.
Slowly.
Together. His face crumpled with relief. He squeezed my hand so hard it almost hurt. That's the part people don't understand when they imagine this kind of story. They expect drama in the form of shouting, doors slamming, heartbreak like a movie. But the real drama was quieter and more intimate. The steady work of staying present while the person you love reveals layers you didn't know existed, and realizing that love isn't only about recognizing someone, it's about choosing to keep learning them. We made rules because we needed structure to hold us while everything shifted. No secrets. No purchases hidden away. No disappearing into the bedroom like it was a different world. If he wanted to dress, he could tell me. If I felt overwhelmed, I could say so. If either of us needed a pause, we'd take it without punishment. The first time he asked me directly, really asked, my heart pounded like I was about to step on stage. We were folding laundry, and he held a clean t-shirt in his hands like it was a shield. Can I? He began, then stopped, then tried again. Can I show you? I looked at him. His face was pale. Yes, I said. He nodded and walked to the bedroom. I followed, my steps slow, like I was entering sacred ground. He opened the closet without hesitation now, pulled the garment bag out, unzipped it. He didn't look like someone sneaking. He looked like someone claiming space. He turned his back to me as he put the bra on, because he wasn't ready for me to see that part yet. I heard the clasp click, the slight rustle of fabric. Then he picked up the breast forms from their box, held them in his hands for a moment like he was steadying himself, and slipped them into the cups. When he turned around, I felt my breath leave my body. He looked like my husband and also like someone else. The curves changed the way the shirt draped, the way his posture shifted. His arms hung slightly away from his sides, adjusting to the new shape. His eyes were wide, searching my face. Okay, I said, voice shaking. Okay, how do you feel? He swallowed, and his voice came out small, like I can breathe. I walked closer. Every part of me wanted to reach out, but I was afraid of doing the wrong thing, afraid of making him feel like an object. So I asked first. "Can I touch your shoulder?" I said, because starting there felt safe. He nodded. I placed my hand on his shoulder, felt the familiar bone and muscle under the fabric, then let my hand slide down his arm. He shivered, not in a sensual way, but in a nervous way, like he was overwhelmed by being seen. "You're still you," I said softly. He blinked hard. "I know," he whispered, "but it feels like I'm more me, too." We stood like that for a long time. The suspense wasn't about whether he'd look convincing. It was about whether our marriage could stretch to hold this new truth without tearing. In the weeks that followed, we moved in small steps. He asked me questions I never thought I'd answer for him. How a bra should fit, how to measure for cup size, how to walk in a way that felt natural when your center of gravity changes. We watched tutorials together, not the exaggerated ones, but gentle ones about posture, about finding clothing that suits your body, about makeup as a tool rather than a mask. We laugh sometimes because life needs laughter, and I learned the difference between laughing with him and laughing at him. He needed the first. He feared the second. One night, I came home and found him sitting at the vanity in our room. My vanity, the one I'd always assumed was mine alone, holding a tube of lipstick like it was a dangerous object. His hands were shaking. "I tried earlier," he admitted. "It looked wrong." "It's not wrong," I said, setting my bag down. "It's just unfamiliar." He looked up at me, eyes pleading. "Will you help?" That question hit me harder than I expected. Help. It meant trust. It meant he was letting me into a room inside him he'd kept locked even from himself. I stood behind him and looked at his face in the mirror. His features were his, strong in some places, soft in others. I realized then that femininity wasn't about erasing him. It was about revealing parts of him he'd been trained to hide. "Okay," I said. "We'll do it gently." I started with moisturizer, because everyone deserves softness. Then a little concealer where he looked tired because he was tired. I showed him how to breathe through the awkwardness, how to not press too hard, how to let the process be imperfect. When we got to lipstick, I chose a subtle tinted balm instead, something that wouldn't scream transformation but would whisper it. He stared at himself when we were done. His eyes widened. "I look different." "You look cared for," I said. He turned his head slightly, studying his reflection. "I look like someone who isn't constantly bracing." That sentence cracked something open in me. I felt tears rise, not because he looked pretty, but because he looked peaceful, and I realized how rarely he'd let himself be that. Then came the twist I never expected. I began to grieve a version of him I hadn't lost yet. The old familiar shape of our life, the simple certainty of husband, the easy labels that let me move through the world without explanation. I hated myself for that grief, because it felt selfish. But it was real. It lived alongside my love, and I learned that you can hold two truths at once. You can support someone's transformation and still mourn the comfort of what you understood. One evening, we had dinner with friends. He didn't dress then. He wore his usual jeans and button-up. But I noticed the way he held himself, the way his eyes drifted toward women's clothes in a store window as we walked, the way his smile seemed strained when someone joked about being a man. The world's expectations pressed on him like weight, and I could feel it, too, like we were both carrying a secret made of glass. Later that night, after we got home, he sat on the edge of the bed and said, "I can't do this alone anymore." My heart pounded. "What do you mean?" He looked at me, and there was a new steadiness in his eyes. "I want to talk to a therapist," he said. "Someone who understands gender. I need help sorting this out in my head." Relief washed through me so strong, I almost laughed. Not because therapy was funny, but because it meant he wasn't trying to sprint into the unknown without a map. It meant he was taking this seriously, responsibly. "Yes," I said quickly.
Yes.
"We'll find someone." He repeated, and his voice softened. "You'll come?" I hesitated only a moment. "If you want me to." "I do," he said. "I want you in this with me." The sessions were hard, not because anyone said cruel things, but because speaking truth out loud is its own kind of labor. He learned language for feelings he'd carried wordlessly for years. I learned how to listen without making it about my fear. Sometimes I cried in the car afterward, not because I regretted anything, but because change is heavy even when it's right. As he explored, he also became more bold in small ways. He bought his own cardigan, not borrowing mine. He chose a gentle perfume that smelled like clean skin and citrus, and the first time he wore it to work, he kept touching his wrist like he couldn't believe he was allowed. He started practicing voice, not to imitate anyone, but to find a tone that felt comfortable. He began to take care of his nails, filing them neatly, not painted at first, just clean and shaped. Those details, so small to outsiders, felt enormous to us. They were steps across a bridge neither of us could see the end of. And then came the night that truly earned the title in my head, the night that made my heart race and my world tilt in a way I still can't fully describe. It was late. Rain tapped the windows. The kind of night where everything feels enclosed, private, like the house is a safe shell. He came into the living room wearing a loose sweatshirt, but his posture was different.
He looked resolved.
"I need to tell you something," he said. My stomach dropped. "Okay." He sat down across from me, hands clasped so tightly his knuckles were white. "I did something without telling you," he admitted. The old fear surged back, hot and sharp. "What?" I said, and my voice sounded too loud. He flinched. "Not like that," he said quickly. "Not cheating. Not anything like that. He took a shaky breath. "I went to a doctor." My heart hammered. "About what?" He looked at me, eyes glossy. "About hormones," he said. I stared at him, frozen. "Did you start?" I asked, barely able to get the words out. He shook his head. "Not yet. I didn't want to start without you knowing. But I had the consultation. I asked questions. I got blood work. I needed to know what was possible." A rush of emotions hit me at once. Fear, relief, anger that he'd gone alone, gratitude that he'd stopped before crossing the line without me. I breathed in, slow, trying to steady myself. "Okay," I said, voice shaking. "Okay. What did they say?" He swallowed. "They said if I start, changes can happen slowly.
Skin, mood,
Body fat distribution, and chest." The word hung in the air, heavy. He looked down at his sweatshirt, then back up at me. "I keep imagining waking up one day and not needing the forms. Just being." His voice broke. "And I'm scared because that sounds like happiness." I sat very still. I realized then that the suspense in our story wasn't about clothing or makeup. It was about identity, about whether the person I married was going to become someone else, or whether he was going to become more himself, and I'd have to learn a new way to love him. I stood up and crossed the room, then sat beside him. "Thank you for telling me," I said. "Thank you for not doing it in secret." He exhaled, trembling. "I want your honesty," he whispered. "If you can't do this, I need to know. I can't live a half-life forever." His words pierced me. Half-life. That was what he'd been living, and I'd unknowingly benefited from it, because his hiding had kept my world simple. I looked at him, really looked, and saw the exhaustion in his face, the years of bracing. And I felt something settle in me. Not certainty, but commitment. "I don't know what this will look like," I admitted. "I'm afraid. But I love you. And I'd rather walk through something hard with you than watch you fade in silence." He started to cry then, openly, without trying to hide it. I put my arms around him, and he clung to me like a person learning they won't be dropped. After that night, we made another rule. If we were going to change, we would do it with intention. No rushing. No punishing honesty. We talked about practical things no one tells you about in dramatic stories. What he wanted to be called if he ever changed his name, what pronouns felt right or wrong, how to handle family gatherings, what boundaries we needed around privacy. We talked about safety at work, about who knew what. We talked about the way the world can be both beautiful and cruel. And then, because life loves timing, his father took a turn for the worse. The hospital smelled like antiseptic and stale coffee. The waiting room chairs were uncomfortable. His mother's eyes were red. The whole family gathered in that tense way families do when grief is hovering nearby. My husband, my brave, conflicted, tender husband, stood beside his father's bed wearing the same stiff armor he'd worn his whole life. Not because he wanted to, but because he wasn't ready to complicate this moment with another truth. But when his father's eyes fluttered open and he looked at his son, something unexpected happened. His father's voice was weak, but his grip was still strong when he caught my husband's hand. "You look tired," his father rasped. My husband forced a smile. "I'm okay." His father studied him, eyes sharp even through illness. "No," he whispered. "You're carrying something." I held my breath. My husband's throat bobbed as he swallowed. His eyes flicked toward me, and in that glance I saw panic. Not because he wanted to confess to his father, but because he couldn't bear one more person seeing through him. His father's hand squeezed. "Whatever it is," he murmured, "don't wait too long to live." The words landed like a stone dropped into still water, ripples spreading through all of us. I felt tears rise instantly. My husband's face crumpled, and for a second he looked like a child. He didn't confess there. He didn't say the words. But he leaned down and pressed his forehead to his father's hand, and his shoulders shook. Later, in the car, he stared out the window at the dark highway and said, "What if he knew? What if he always knew something was different?" I reached for his hand. "Maybe," I said. "Or maybe he just knew you were suffering." He swallowed hard. "I don't want to suffer anymore." That night, back home, he went to the closet and pulled out the garment bag with a steadiness I hadn't seen before. "I want a dress," he said quietly. "Not as an escape. As a reminder that I'm still here." I nodded. "Okay." He took his time. He put on the bra, the forms, a soft blouse he'd bought for himself, light fabric, simple cut. Then he stood in front of the mirror, breathing, shoulders relaxed. He didn't look like he was pretending. He looked like he was recovering a lost part of himself. "I think I want to start," he said suddenly, voice calm in a way that frightened me, because calm meant decision. "Hormones."
Slowly.
"Under medical supervision. I want to see what it feels like to have my body shift toward what my mind keeps reaching for." My heart pounded. "Okay," I said, and the word felt like stepping onto a bridge again. He turned to me, eyes shining. "Are you sure?" "No," I admitted, tears spilling. "I'm not sure, but I'm here." He walked to me and took my hands. His palms were warm. "I don't know what I'll look like," he whispered. "I don't know who I'll be." "You'll be you," I said, even though my voice shook. "And I'll be learning you." He started hormones 2 months later. We treated it like something sacred and ordinary at the same time. A daily pill, a routine. No dramatic montage. Just a quiet decision repeated each day. He kept a journal of changes, mood shifts, energy levels, moments of unexpected emotion. Sometimes he'd laugh at himself for crying at a commercial. Sometimes he'd look frightened when his reflection felt unfamiliar. The first physical changes were subtle. His skin softened, not dramatically, but enough that I noticed when I brushed my fingers along his arm. His face looked slightly different around the eyes, like tension had loosened. He began to carry himself with less heaviness, like his spine wasn't constantly bracing against an invisible force. Then one morning, he came out of the shower wrapped in a towel, hair damp, and froze when he saw me. "What?" I asked immediately, alarmed. He stared down at his chest, then back up at me. His voice trembled. I think something's happening." My heart jumped. "Are you okay?" He nodded quickly.
"Yeah."
"Just," he swallowed. "Tenderness. Here." He hesitated, then pointed to his chest, careful, as if even naming it could make it more real. "It's sore." The moment felt electric, not because it was sexual, but because it was irreversible. Tenderness meant change was no longer theoretical. It was happening inside him, under his skin. I approached slowly. "Do you want me to look?" I asked, because consent mattered even in marriage, especially now. He nodded, eyes wide. He loosened the towel slightly, and I saw it. Not a dramatic difference, not something anyone else would notice fully clothed, but a subtle fullness, a swelling that wasn't there before. His chest looked alive in a new way. He pressed his lips together, trembling. That's mine, he whispered, as if he couldn't believe it. A wave of emotion hit me so strong I had to sit down. He looked at me, alarmed. Are you upset? I shook my head quickly, tears in my eyes. I'm overwhelmed, I admitted. Because it's real. He nodded, swallowing hard. It's real, he echoed. Over the next weeks, the change continued, slowly, quietly. The tenderness persisted, then eased. The fullness became more defined. Not exaggerated, not sudden, but undeniably there. He bought a soft bralette for support, not because he wanted to show off, but because his body needed it. The first time he wore it under a t-shirt, he walked around the house with his arms slightly away from his sides, still learning the shape of himself. And one night, standing in our bedroom with a lamp casting warm light, he turned to me with a look that was half laughter, half disbelief, and said, I think I have, you know. I raised my eyebrows, heart racing. You have what? He gestured awkwardly at his chest, cheeks flushed, and the absurdity of the moment broke through the intensity. I think I have new breasts, he said, stumbling over the word like it was both thrilling and terrifying. I stared at him for a second, then laughed. Not a cruel laugh, but a startled, emotional laugh that turned into tears. Oh my God, I whispered. You do. He looked down at himself, then back at me, and his face opened into a smile I had never seen before, a smile that looked like sunrise. They're mine, he said again, as if it was the only sentence that could contain the feeling. In that moment, the title that had once sounded like a joke became something else entirely, a feminization surprise not because it was sudden, but because it revealed how deep his truth ran. The surprise wasn't the change in his body. It was the change in his spirit, the way he seemed to inhabit himself for the first time. But suspense doesn't disappear just because someone smiles. If anything, it sharpened, because now the question wasn't whether he would change. The question was how the world would respond, and whether we could keep choosing each other through the responses. He told his sister first. We invited her over on a Sunday afternoon, made tea, sat at the table like we were about to announce something heavy. His hands shook. I held them. I need to tell you something about me, he said, voice steady only, because he'd practiced. She listened, eyes widening, then softening. When he finished, she reached across the table and said, I always wondered why you were so hard on yourself. He blinked, startled. You did. She nodded. You always looked like you were holding your breath. Her eyes flicked briefly to his chest, then back to his face with gentle respect. I'm glad you're exhaling. He cried then, and she hugged him, and I watched and felt my own heart crack open again, because support is a kind of miracle when you've spent your life expecting rejection. Telling his mother was harder. Not because she was cruel, but because she was afraid. She worried about safety, about judgment, about what people would say. She said the wrong things at first, stumbling over language, clinging to old images of him. He held her hand and said calmly, I'm still your child. I'm just trying to be alive in my own skin. It took time. Love often does. At work, he made careful choices. He didn't announce everything. He started with small shifts, softer colors, slightly different cuts of clothing, a gentle confidence in his posture. He found allies quietly, one trusted coworker at a time. Some people noticed. Some didn't. The world kept turning. And through all of it, our marriage changed in ways I couldn't have predicted. We became more honest in general, not only about gender. We talked about fear, about aging, about the ways we'd both been shaped by expectations. I confessed my own secret anxieties, my own moments of feeling like I was performing wife, rather than being a person. He listened with a tenderness that made me realize he had always been capable of deep empathy. He'd just been too busy surviving to offer it fully. One evening, months into this journey, we stood in front of the mirror together. He wore a simple dress at home, nothing flashy, just soft fabric that moved with him. His hair was a little longer. His chest was his, not borrowed. He looked at our reflection and said, Do you miss him? I knew exactly who he meant. The version of him I'd married, the one who tried so hard to fit, the one who had softness behind humor and competence. I swallowed, eyes burning. Sometimes, I admitted. Not because I want you to go back, but because I miss the simplicity. I miss thinking I understood everything. He nodded slowly. I miss him too, he whispered, because he tried so hard. I reached for his hand in the mirror, our fingers touching in reflection and in real life. I love you, I said. And I'm proud of you. He smiled faintly. Are you, he asked, voice trembling, still attracted to me as a person? Still in love with me in the way that matters? The question carried all his fear, the fear that this transformation might cost him the one thing he couldn't bear to lose. I turned to face him fully. I put my hands on his shoulders, felt the familiar strength there. I'm in love with your courage, I said. I'm in love with how you're learning to be gentle with yourself. I'm in love with the way you look at life now, like you want to actually live it. He inhaled shakily, and I saw the last of his defenses wobble. Thank you, he whispered. The final hook, the one that kept my heart in suspense until the last moment, arrived on an ordinary day when he came home from a fitting appointment. He walked through the door carrying a small bag. His face was pale, but his eyes were bright. What's that? I asked, trying to keep my voice casual. He held the bag up like it was fragile. It's my first real bra fitting, he said, voice almost laughing with disbelief. They measured me, like properly. My chest tightened. How do you feel?
He looked down, then back at me.
Like I crossed a line, he admitted. But not into danger. Into reality. He pulled the bra out of the bag. It wasn't nude and purely practical, like the first one he'd hidden. It was still modest, still safe, but it had a small detail, a simple scalloped edge, a color that wasn't meant to disappear under clothing. It was his choice, not a hiding tool. He held it up, then looked at me shyly. Will you, he asked, help me adjust it? I stepped closer. Yes. He changed in the bedroom, and when he came out, he stood in front of me with his shoulders back, chest supported, posture steady. He looked like someone who had stopped apologizing for existing. How does it fit? I asked. He breathed in, slowly. Right, he said. It fits right. The words hit me with unexpected force. Not just because of the garment, but because of the metaphor. He was finding ways to fit into himself. I walked up and hugged him carefully, feeling the new shape against me, real, warm, part of him. Not a costume, not a surprise anymore, but a truth we had walked toward together. He rested his cheek against my hair and whispered, I thought I'd lose everything. I thought I'd end up alone with a secret and a box on a closet shelf. I tightened my arms around him. You're not alone, I said. He pulled back slightly and looked at me, eyes shining. I want to renew our vase, he said suddenly, and the boldness of the statement made me laugh in surprise. What? I said, blinking. I want to stand in front of you, he continued, voice stronger now, and promise again. Not as a performance, not as a role, as myself, whoever that is, however that looks. My throat tightened so much I could barely breathe. Okay, I whispered. Okay, we can do that. We didn't plan a big wedding. We planned something intimate, a small gathering in our backyard under string lights, a few close friends, his sister, his mother, a therapist-approved level of honesty and safety. We chose words carefully.
We chose clothing that felt authentic.
He wore a simple outfit that leaned feminine without trying to be something he wasn't ready to claim publicly in every way. He looked radiant, not because of fabric, but because he was present. On the evening of the vow renewal, as the sun dipped and the lights glowed softly, he stood facing me with hands steady. His voice shook at first, then grew clear. I spent so long trying to be what I thought I was supposed to be, he said, looking directly into my eyes. I thought love meant being easy to understand, but I learned love also means being brave enough to be known. Tears blurred my vision. I could see our friends watching, some crying, some smiling. I could feel the hum of the evening air, the weight of everything we'd survived. He took a breath. I don't know exactly where this journey ends, he said, but I know I don't want to hide anymore. I know I want to live. And I know I want to keep choosing you, not as the wife who fits a story, but as the person who has walked with me into truth. I swallowed hard and spoke my own vows, my voice trembling but real. I promise to keep seeing you, I said. Not the version of you the world expects, not the version that makes things simple, but the version that is true. I promise to be honest about my fear without letting fear drive me away. I promise to keep learning you, because the person I love is not a fixed image. The person I love is you, alive and becoming. When we kissed, it wasn't the kiss of a fairy tale ending. It was the kiss of two people who had chosen each other in the middle of uncertainty. Later that night, after everyone left and the string lights swayed gently in the breeze, we stood in our bedroom again, the same room where I'd once crept into the closet like a thief of truth. He looked at himself in the mirror, then at me. "Do you ever think about that night?" he asked softly. "When you found the forms?" "Yes," I admitted. "All the time." He nodded. "I used to think that box was the most shameful thing I owned," he said. "Now I think it was the first honest thing." I stepped closer and put my hand over his heart, feeling it beat steadily under my palm. "Your body is changing," I said, voice quiet. "Your identity is unfolding. But what surprises me the most isn't your chest. It's your peace." He smiled, slow and real. "I'm still scared," he confessed. "I am too," I said. He exhaled, then took my hands and placed them gently against his chest, guiding without forcing, asking without words if I could hold this truth with him. The warmth of his skin traveled into my palms. The reality of him, not borrowed, not hidden, not apologized for. I looked into his eyes and realized the suspense I'd been carrying had finally shifted into something steadier, not certainty, but trust. The kind that doesn't depend on things staying the same. "Whatever happens next," I whispered, "we don't go back to closets." He nodded, eyes shining. "No more closets," he said. And as we turned off the light and climbed into bed, the house around us quiet and ordinary again, I understood something I wish I'd known from the beginning. The biggest transformation wasn't the visible one. It was the way honesty reshaped our love into something stronger than roles, stronger than fear, stronger than the stories we thought we were supposed to live.